The first time Bren went lame, I believed him. That is the part I find hardest to admit now. That I, Calder Rin, Alpha King of Veldreth Hold, Lord of the River Bend and the fog-wrapped highlands above it, believed my own wolf. I have known Bren for 31 years. He arrived the night I turned 12, a gray pup with oversized paws and a habit of sitting on my feet when I was trying to think. I have run with him through 3 winters of war, a siege that lasted 40 days, and a flood that took the lower mill quarter in a single night. I know his moods the way I know the weight of the crown by the precise pressure of them, without having to look. So when he limped into my chamber on the morning of the 7th day of the 10th month, favoring his left foreleg with every step, I did not question it. I called for the hold's healer, old Farwick, who had been treating the pack's wolves since before I was born, and Farwick came, examined the leg, pressed and prodded and frowned, and said he could find nothing. "Perhaps a stone bruise," he said. "Rest him. If it persists, send for a specialist." It persisted. Or rather, Bren persisted. He limped with the dedication of a wolf who had committed to a performance and intended to see it through. By the 3rd day, the limp had migrated subtly, no longer the left foreleg, now the right shoulder. When I pointed this out to Farwick, the old man looked at Bren, then at me, and said nothing whatsoever, which in 30 years of knowing him I had learned meant he had a great deal to say and was choosing not to. "The specialist," I said. "Where do I send?" "There is a healer," Farwick said carefully, "currently lodged at the River Fox Inn at the Lower Market. A traveling practitioner, animal work primarily. She has a reputation along the river holds, unusual methods, effective by most accounts." "Send for her." He nodded, turned to go, and at the doorway paused. "Her name is Lyra Voss," he said, still not looking at me. "She has no pack affiliation. She travels independently." A brief hesitation. "She is quite young." "Farwick." "She is also, I understand, quite perceptive." He left before I could ask him what he meant by that. I would understand later. I always understand things later where Bren is concerned. Lyra Voss arrived at the hold side gate, the healing yard entrance, cedar post kennels on either side, the smell of pine resin and dried herbs at the 2nd hour past noon. I know this because I happened to be in the courtyard above the yard, reviewing grain tallies with my steward Pellin, and the yard was visible through the archway, and I was absolutely not watching the gate. She was shorter than I had imagined. I had imagined someone older, given the reputation Farwick had described. Instead, she was perhaps 25 or 26, carrying a worn leather satchel over one shoulder and a wooden case in her left hand, and she was looking at the kennels with the alert, assessing expression of someone who was already working before she had been formally introduced to the problem. Pellin beside me did not look up from his tallies. "She arrived then," he said. "Yes. And you're watching." "I'm reviewing the grain figures." "You're holding the page upside down, my lord." I turned the page right side up and did not dignify this with a response. Below, one of the kennel handlers, a young man named Thatch, was leading Lyra toward the far run where Bren waited. Bren had been installed there at my instruction, on the grounds that rest was indicated, as Farwick had suggested, and I had told Thatch to say nothing beyond, "The Alpha's wolf has a foreleg complaint." I was maintaining a position of dignified uncertainty regarding the nature of the complaint, because dignified uncertainty was all I had. I watched Lyra set down her case, open it with practiced efficiency, and begin her examination. Bren, to his eternal credit, produced the limp immediately and convincingly. Left foreleg, back to where it had started. He held the leg up with the expression of a wolf in considerable distress, his ears low, his eyes soft with suffering. Lyra ran her hands along the leg from shoulder to paw. She pressed, she flexed, she bent and looked at the paw pads. She pressed again. Then she straightened and looked at Bren for a long moment, one hand still resting on the leg she had just examined. Bren wagged his tail once, just once. Lyra's expression did not change. She reached into her satchel and produced a small jar, unscrewed the lid, and applied what appeared to be a cooling salve to the perfectly healthy foreleg with every indication of professional seriousness. Then she said something to Thatch. I was too far away to hear it. Thatch nodded. She repacked her case, accepted her fee from the steward's assistant, and left through the side gate. I turned back to Pellin and his grain tallies and said, "Fine. It's handled." Pellin said, "Yes, my lord," and did not smile, but his voice had a shape to it that was adjacent to smiling, and I chose not to investigate further. 3 days later, Bren began coughing. Not a real cough, not the wet, labored sound of a wolf with a chest infection, which I have heard twice in my life and know the weight of. This was a dry, measured cough, produced at intervals, with the disciplined regularity of a wolf who had thought carefully about the timing. I sat in my chair across the room and listened to it for 1 full hour. "Bren," I said. He coughed again mournfully. "Your foreleg has healed with remarkable speed." He regarded me with the enormous eyes of the unjustly suffering. I pressed my fingers to my temple. "I am going to send for her again," I said. "I want you to understand that I am aware of what I am doing when I do this, and that it reflects extremely poorly on both of us." Bren rested his chin on his paw and let out a long, theatrical breath. I sent for her again. This time, I was present in the healing yard when she arrived, on entirely legitimate grounds, because several of the pack's secondary wolves were also due for their autumn checks, and it was reasonable for the alpha to be present for those. I was standing near the North Kennel Run, discussing something with Thatch. I cannot now recall what, which tells you what my attention was actually engaged with, when Lyra Voss came through the side gate. She saw me before I had arranged myself into the posture of someone who had not been watching the gate. She stopped. She looked at me with the direct, slightly flat gaze of someone who has already formed a hypothesis and is deciding whether to share it. "My lord," she said. "The wolf has a chest complaint," I said. "A rattle, possibly an infection." She looked at Bren, who was sitting beside me with his tail moving in a slow, steady wag, the tail of a wolf who was entirely well, and then looked back at me. "I'll examine him," she said pleasantly, and set down her case. The examination took longer this time. She listened to his chest with a small device, a hollow tube fitted with a membrane, something I had not seen before, and her brow knitted as she moved it along his ribs and side. She tapped her fingers against his chest wall in different places and listened. She asked Thatch how long the cough had been present and how often it occurred. She asked about his diet and exercise. I answered most of these questions myself, because I knew the answers. She was aware that I was answering them. She looked at me once, mid-examination, with an expression that was carefully neutral in a way that suggested it was being kept that way with deliberate effort. "I find no infection," she said when she had finished. "His lungs are clear, his heart is strong." She paused. "The chest wall sounds entirely normal." "Then what is causing the cough?" She looked at Bren. Bren coughed once with impeccable timing. "I'm not certain," she said. "I'll leave something for the throat. It may be irritation, if it continues." "I'll send for you," I said. "Yes," she said, in the tone of someone who had already assumed this was what I would say. "You likely will." She left. I did not watch her go, because Pellin was nearby and I had some remaining dignity. Bren wagged his tail the entire walk back to my chamber. "You are insufferable," I told him. He sat on my feet, which he had not done since we were both young, and leaned his full weight against my leg, and I stood there in the corridor of my own hold and did not move him, because his weight was warm and familiar, and because somewhere in the past 4 days something had shifted in my chest that I did not yet have the vocabulary to name. The eye came next. A cloudiness, Thatch told me gravely, repeating what Bren had apparently communicated through the medium of standing in the kennel run and blinking slowly at the wall. I should note that Bren's vision is, and has always been, exceptional. He can track a moving figure at 400 yards on a fog-wrapped morning. I have witnessed this personally on multiple occasions. The cloudiness presented itself on the 5th day after the chest complaint had resolved. I sat with Bren in the yard and looked at the eye in question. It looked back at me, bright and sharp and entirely clear. Bren. A slow blink. I am sending for her. A tail wag. This is going to end, I said, in a way that is embarrassing for us both. I want you to know that I know that. He laid his head in my lap, which is something he does when I am at my most foolish, and he is at his most patient. And I sat in the autumn afternoon and looked at the old stone walls and the fog coming off the river, and tried to work out exactly when my wolf had decided to conduct my personal life on my behalf without consulting me. The answer, I knew, was longer ago than the limp. Bren had been restless for months, pacing the chamber at night, sitting at the window of the great hall and watching the lower market road with the alert attention of a wolf listening for something specific. I had attributed it to the season. I had attributed it to his age. I had attributed it to a change in the pack's secondary wolves, who had been rearranging their hierarchies in the usual autumn way. I had attributed it to everything except the obvious, because the obvious was something I had put away a long time ago and told myself I was done with. I am 41. I have ruled Veldrath Hold since I was 23. I had a mate once, Sever, who was kind and steady and who I had loved in the measured, deliberate way of a young man who had learned that measured and deliberate were the safest registers. She died in the 4th year of our mating, a fever that came in the night and was over before morning, the way some things are, and I had learned something then about the kind of love you build slowly and the way it ends anyway, all at once. I had not looked for a mate since. Bren had apparently grown tired of waiting for me to reconsider. So I sent for Lyra Voss again, and this time I told Pelin to make sure she was offered a room in the guest quarters for the night, in case the examination ran late, and Pelin said, "Of course, my lord," with the expression of a man who has worked for me for 14 years and knows when to say nothing, and when to say nothing with a great deal of warmth. She arrived in the early afternoon and found me waiting in the healing yard, which had stopped pretending to be a coincidence and was now simply the truth. She set her case down. She looked at me. She looked at Bren, who was doing the clouded eye performance with real commitment, slow blinks, a slight tilt of the head, the aura of a wolf whose vision was troubling him. She looked back at me. "How long has the eye been clouded?" she asked. "Since the 6th, 3 days. And the chest complaint has fully resolved." "Entirely." "And the foreleg?" "Perfect," I said, "completely recovered." She nodded. She opened her case, produced a small light lens, and examined the eye in question with thorough professional attention. She moved the lens. She asked Bren to track a motion with his gaze, and he tracked it with the smooth, accurate precision of a wolf whose vision was, in fact, perfect. There was a pause. "His eye," she said carefully, "is entirely clear." "I see. There is no cloudiness that I can detect, no opacity, no inflammation, no sign of any condition that would produce the symptoms as described." "I see." She straightened. She looked at me with the direct, flat gaze from the first visit, except that now it had something else in it, something that was not quite amusement, or not only amusement, and was also not quite exasperation, or not only that either. "My lord," she said. "Yes. I have now visited this hold 3 times in the space of 2 weeks. You have. And on each occasion, I have examined your wolf and found him to be in excellent health. He has been fortunate." "He has been," she agreed, and the not quite amusement sharpened slightly, "extremely fortunate. each complaint resolving almost immediately after examination, and a new one presenting within a few days of each departure. Bren chose this moment to lean against her leg. Just leaned, the full weight of him, the way he leans against me when he wants me to stop doing something foolish. She looked down at him. He looked up at her with the enormous, gentle eyes of a wolf who has no agenda whatsoever. "He's warm," she said almost to herself. "He's always warm. He runs at a high temperature." "No, I mean—" She stopped. She set her hand on his head, and I watched something move across her face, a kind of stillness, the way a person goes still when they have recognized something and are not certain what to do with the recognition. I knew the feeling. I had been living with it for 2 weeks. "I think," she said carefully, "that your wolf may be entirely well. I think you may be right. Which means someone has been summoning me here under false pretenses. That is one interpretation. What is the other interpretation?" I looked at her. She was looking at me. The afternoon fog was rolling in off the river behind her, soft and gray, and the cedar post kennels smelled of pine and dry hay, and my wolf was leaning against her leg with the satisfaction of someone who has done a difficult job and done it well. "The other interpretation," I said, "is that my wolf, who has more sense than I do and always has, identified something I was failing to address and took matters into his own hands." I paused. Pause. She looked at Bren. Bren wagged his tail slowly, and then settled into a sit against her leg and leaned harder. "And what," she said, "was he trying to address?" "I believe he was trying to address the fact that his king is a thorough idiot," I said, "and needed repeated exposure to the same person before he could manage to say something honest about it." The not quite amusement arrived in full then. It changed her face, opened it, the way a window let in light, the dry sharpness of it warming into something that was genuinely funny and also genuinely warm at the same time, and I understood in that moment why Bren had been doing what he had been doing, even if he could have chosen methods that preserved more of my dignity. "That is," she said, "the most indirect way anyone has ever expressed interest in me. I am aware, I am not proud of it. Your wolf is, though." "My wolf," I said, "has no shame and never has." She laughed then, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and I understood from the sound of it that she did not laugh easily, and that this particular sound was something that happened when her guard came down, and that it was the most disarming thing I had heard in years. My chest did something I chose not to examine closely. Bren made a low sound that I can only describe as smug. "I should go," she said. "You should," I agreed. "The guest quarters in the East Wing have been prepared, if you'd prefer not to ride back to the lower market tonight." She went still again, a different kind of still this time. "You were expecting me to stay." "I was hoping you might find a reason to." She looked at me for a long moment. In that look was the assessment of a woman who has traveled alone for years and knows how to read the room she enters, who has no pack behind her and no kin to appeal to and has never needed them, who has built her life on her own terms and intends to go on doing exactly that. I held it. I did not look away, and I did not fill the silence with anything, because I had spent 2 weeks talking around the truth and I was done with that. "One night," she said. "One night," I agreed. She picked up her case. Bren fell into step beside her toward the hold's inner door, and he looked back at me once with the expression of a wolf who has managed a complicated project and is waiting for appropriate acknowledgement. "Don't," I told him. He wagged his tail anyway. She stayed 3 nights. Not because I asked her to stay longer, I did not, because I had said 1 night and I meant what I said. She stayed because on the morning after the first night, one of the pack's secondary wolves presented with a genuine injury, a torn pad from the rocky north run, and she was there, and it was sensible for her to treat it. And then because the afternoon brought a question from Thatch about a kennel wolf who had been off her feed for 2 weeks, and Lyra looked at the wolf and found a simple fix and stayed to see it through. On the third morning, she was in the healing yard at first light, reorganizing the kennel's medicine stocks with the focused efficiency of someone who had noticed they needed reorganizing and could not stop themselves from doing it. And I found her there while I was making my own morning rounds of the hold and told her she did not have to do that. She looked at me over her shoulder. The cedar oil is stored next to the warming rubs. They should be kept separate. The cedar degrades the compound in the rubs if it's stored adjacent long-term. I will tell Thatch. I already told Thatch. He's gone to get a second shelf bracket. She turned back to the shelving. Also, your splinting materials are in the wrong order. You want the lightest gauge accessible first, not last. I leaned against the kennel post and watched her work and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say. She moved through the healing yard with the unconscious authority of someone in her right place, not the authority of rank or command, but the authority of competence, of a person whose hands know exactly what they are doing and whose mind is 3 steps ahead of the task. I had been in the presence of competence before. My council was full of capable people. My commanders were skilled. My steward Pellin could manage the entire hold's accounts in his sleep. But this was different. This was competence that had no audience and needed none. She reorganized the shelving because it needed reorganizing, not because anyone was watching, not because she would be credited for it. She would be gone in a day or two, and Thatch would use the properly ordered shelves and never think about who had arranged them. You've been doing this a long time, I said. Since I was 17. I apprenticed with a healer in the Feln River holds. He treated the pack wolves for 4 holds up and down the river. When he retired, I just kept going. Alone. Alone. You said you have no pack affiliation. I don't. She moved a row of jar-sealed compounds to the newly cleared upper shelf. I'm from a small pack eastern edge of the holds near the Greywood. They dispersed when I was 15. The pack alpha died, the hold came apart, people went where they could. A pause. I went where I could, ended up with the healer. That was that. She said it without grief and without bitterness. The plain, factual tone of someone who has had a long time to settle their history into something that does not require a particular feeling when described. I'm sorry, I said. It was a long time ago. She glanced back at me briefly. What about you? What about me? You have a hold and a pack and a wolf and a council and presumably a great deal of grain, based on the tallies I saw Pellin reviewing on the first day. What don't you have? She asked it lightly. The same dry register she had used when she said it was the most indirect way anyone had ever expressed interest in her. But under the lightness, it was a real question, and she was watching me with the same direct gaze she had used to examine Bren's perfectly healthy eye. I had a mate, I said. Sever, she died 18 years ago. I know, she said. Farwick mentioned it, not as a disclosure, just as context when he was explaining the situation. A beat. He was rooting for you, if that helps. Farwick is 81 years old and has been rooting for me to do something inadvisable for at least 30 of those years. She smiled, the smaller, private version of the laugh she had laughed in the yard, the one that did not need an audience. And is this inadvisable? Objectively, yes. I have known you for 2 weeks, most of which you spent being exasperated with my wolf's malingering. You have no pack affiliation, which my council considers a significant irregularity. You travel alone and have made clear you prefer it. I'm a man who does not say what he means until his wolf has to engineer a situation where he has no choice. I paused. It is inadvisable in every way I can identify. And yet, I agreed. She looked at me for a moment longer, and then she turned back to the shelving and said, "Hand me those rolled linens." And I handed them to her, and we worked together in the healing yard in the morning fog, not saying anything in particular, and it was the most comfortable I had been in a very long time. The council session happened on the 6th day. I should explain the council. Veldrath Hold's inner council is 5 people. Pelin, my steward, who has been with me since I took the hold and who knows everything that happens within the walls. Commander Tharv, who oversees the pack's defensive wolves and is a woman of rigid principle and exactly 0 patience for anything she considers irregular. Lord Cavis, who represents the Hold's 3 primary families and who has been attempting to arrange my next mating alliance for approximately 14 years. Lady Unna, who holds the Hold's healing and welfare portfolio and who is technically Farwick's superior, and Aldrich, my bond counselor, who reads the pack's wolf bonds and advises on matters of the Hold's spiritual compact. These 5 people knew, by the 6th day, that a traveling healer with no pack affiliation had been in the Hold for 3 nights past the single night she had been offered. They had not commented on this, in the way that 5 people who know better than to comment too soon will not comment. They had, however, arranged a full council session for the 6th day on the grounds that there was regular Hold business to discuss, which was true, and which was also convenient. Lyra was in the healing yard when I went to the council chamber. Bren came with me. As he often does, he attends council sessions in the capacity of a wolf who has not been invited and does not care. The session began normally. Pelin reviewed the grain inventory. The figures were sound. Tharv reported on the North Run repair and the secondary wolves' autumn assessments. Cavis raised, for perhaps the 48th time in 14 years, the question of a mating alliance with the Thurwick Hold's 3 days east, suggesting that a formal arrangement could bring beneficial trade agreements. Unna reviewed the Hold's healing stores. Aldrich had nothing pressing. Bren was sitting beside my chair, apparently asleep. His chin was on his paws. His breathing was slow and regular. He had been sitting beside my chair in council sessions for years, and he was usually asleep by the grain inventory, and I had no reason whatsoever to be concerned. I should have been concerned. What happened next took approximately 7 minutes and cannot be fully reconstructed in linear order, because chaos does not occur linearly. What I can report is that Bren, who had been apparently asleep, was suddenly not asleep, that he had somehow acquired, from the side corridor that connects the council chamber to the East Wing guest quarters, a single indoor boot, that the boot in question belonged to Lyra Voss, who had come to the council chamber door to ask Pelin a question about the kennel account records, that Bren presented the boot to the council chamber at large with the pride of a wolf who has brought a substantial gift, that Lyra was now standing in the doorway of the council chamber in 1 boot and 1 stockinged foot, holding her half-assembled medical case, having apparently been intercepted in the corridor by a wolf who had decided it was time for a meeting. That Lord Cavis said, "Is this the healer?" in a tone of considerable interest. That Commander Tharv said, "Does she always attend council in half her footwear?" in a tone of considerably less charity. That Bren placed the boot at Lyra's stockinged foot with the deliberate precision of a wolf making a point, and that Aldrich, the bond counselor, said nothing at all, but rose slowly from his chair and looked at Lyra Voss with an expression of sudden, complete attention. There was a silence. Lyra looked at the boot, she looked at Bren, she looked at the council, she looked at me. "I apologize," she said, with the composure of a woman who has walked into a great many difficult rooms in her career. "I was looking for the steward's office." "It's the next door," Pelin said helpfully. "I see." She bent and took the boot from Bren's mouth, and Bren let it go and sat back with the satisfied look of a wolf whose plan has arrived at its intended destination. Aldrich said from across the chamber, "My lord." I looked at him. He was still looking at Lyra, with the steady attention of a bond counselor who was reading something he had not expected to read in this room on this day. "My lord," he said again, "I need to speak with you privately." "Whatever you need to say," I said, "can be said here." Aldrich looked at me for a moment. He had been my bond counselor for 9 years, and he knew when I meant something, and when I was saying it to avoid saying the other thing. "The healer," he said carefully, is carrying a bond signature that the pack's resonance recognizes. Commander Tharv said, "What exactly does that mean?" "It means," Aldrich said, "that she is not unaffiliated with this Hold's pack." A pause, very quiet. "It means she was never unaffiliated with it. It means the bond was present before she arrived." The silence in the council chamber was a different quality now. Not the silence of surprise, but the silence of a room in which everyone has just heard something they will need a moment to settle into. Lord Cavis said, in a different tone than he had used before, "The traveling healer is the Alpha King's fated mate." He said it plainly, as a man who has been arranging mating alliances for 14 years and knows an accomplished fact when he sees one. There was no triumph in it. There was, I thought, a certain relief, in the way that a 14-year project being concluded by forces outside your control is at least concluded. Lyra had not moved from the doorway. I stood up, not quickly, not with the urgency of a king making a proclamation, but with the deliberate unhaste of a man who has spent 6 days approaching something and is now simply arriving at it. "Lyra," I said. She looked at me. "I would like to tell the council something," I said, "and I would like to tell it with you present, if you're willing to stay in that doorway for another moment." She was still, the same still as in the yard on the 3rd visit, the same still as in the corridor on the 3rd morning, the still of a woman who is making a real assessment. "Go ahead," she said. I turned to the council and I said, "I am not forming a mating alliance with the Thurwick Holds. Lord Cavis, I am grateful for the 14 years of effort on that question, and I am sorry to have let it run so long without resolution. The resolution is that it isn't happening." I paused. "This Holds pack has recognized a fated mate, and Bren recognized her before I managed to say so myself, which is an embarrassment I will be living with for some time. Her name is Lyra Voss. She has no pack affiliation because her pack dispersed when she was 15, which means she has been traveling alone for 10 years on the strength of her own competence, which is considerable. She reorganized the healing yard stock room this morning without being asked to do it, because the cedar oil was adjacent to the warming rubs, and that is not correct storage. She will tell you herself what she wants and what she does not want, because she is perfectly capable of doing so, and I will be standing here beside her while she does it." I looked at Lyra. She was looking at me with an expression that was not quite the laugh from the yard. It had more weight in it, more complexity, the look of a person who has heard something they did not expect and is turning it over carefully. "Is there something you'd like to add?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You still haven't actually asked me anything." Tharv made a sound that might, from a great distance, have been interpreted as stifled amusement. Pellin's mouth did the thing it had been doing for 6 days. Cavis settled back in his chair, with the expression of a man watching an outcome he had not anticipated but could respect. "You're right," I said. "I have not." I looked at her properly, the woman standing in my council chamber doorway in one boot and one stocking, with her medical case half assembled and Bren sitting at her side with the dignity of a wolf who has conducted a successful operation. "Lyra, I would like to ask if you'll consider staying, not as anything the council decides or the pack requires, as something you choose. If you want to go, the East Road is open, and I'll send a rider with you as far as the Felm Bridge. If you want to stay, the healing yard needs someone who understands storage." "A beat. The cedar oil," she said. "Among other things." She looked at the council, who were looking back at her with the various expressions of 5 people who have been blindsided by events and are recalibrating with different degrees of grace. She looked at Bren, who thumped his tail once against the floor. She looked at me. "I have one question," she said. "Ask it." "When Bren brought me the boot just now, was that you?" "No." "Did you know he was going to do it?" "No. He has never consulted me once in 31 years. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, with the precise, dry weight of someone delivering a verdict. That is both the most believable and the most useless answer I've ever received. And then after another beat, a real one, not a performer's pause. Yes. She did not stay because I wanted her to. This is important. I have thought about it often in the years since, because there is a version of events where a king says come, and a woman with no pack and no kin says yes, because she has nothing to refuse with, because the gravity of hold and title and pack resonance is simply too much for a person standing alone in a doorway. I have thought about whether what happened in that doorway was a choice or a surrender, and I have asked her about it, and her answer has not changed in all the time I have had the benefit of it. She told me when I asked her. She had known about Bren by the second visit. She had suspected by the end of the first, when he wagged his tail at her over the perfectly healthy foreleg, but by the chest complaint she was certain, and she had come back anyway. Not because she believed she was fated to, not because the hold was appealing, not because she was lonely, though she had been lonely in the way that independent people are lonely, at a distance from it, arranged around it, not consumed by it. She came back, she said, because Bren's scheme was the funniest thing anyone had ever done on someone else's behalf, and she wanted to see where it went. And she stayed, she said, when I pressed her, years later on the specific moment. She stayed because of what I said about the cedar oil. Anyone can say the important things, she said. Most people do say the important things eventually when they're forced to. What they don't say is the small thing, the specific true thing that has nothing to do with the moment's stakes. She looked at me with the direct, flat gaze that I have never once in our years together found anything but completely honest. You said the cedar oil was adjacent to the warming rubs. That's what you noticed. After the bond counselor just announced I was your fated mate in front of your entire council, and after all of it, what you told them was that I understand storage. A pause. That's when I knew you were telling the truth, not about the fated mate, about the rest. This is what I mean when I say she stayed because she chose to. The council did not choose for her. The pack resonance did not choose for her. The boot and the scheme and the 6 days of accumulated absurdity did not choose for her. She looked at a man in a council chamber making a small, true, slightly mortifying observation about her knowledge of compound storage, and she decided to stay, and that was hers entirely. Bren was insufferable about it for years. I use the word with full acknowledgement that he had earned it. He had identified, through means I still do not entirely understand but have given up trying to, the person who was right for me before I had managed to identify her myself. He had then constructed, from the raw materials of my own cowardice and his own substantial will, a series of increasingly implausible veterinary complaints designed to produce repeated contact between us until I managed to say something honest. He had capped this with a boot theft during a formal council session, timed to coincide exactly with the moment I would have to speak or forever remain silent. He had been right about all of it. He was insufferable about it in the particular way of a wolf who does not say, "I told you so," but who also does not need to, because his entire resting posture conveys it. Lyra found this deeply funny. She understood him from the beginning in the way that she understands all the animals she has treated, not by pretending they are human, but by paying close attention to what they actually are. What Bren actually is, she told me once, is a wolf who loved his king enough to be embarrassing on his behalf. She considered this a high form of devotion. I considered it an enduring character flaw. They were, in any case, allies from the beginning, which meant I was regularly outvoted 2-1 on questions of my own better judgment, and I have not found this to be a net loss. The council was, in the end, straightforwardly accepting. Tharv, who had said the thing about the footwear, she came to the healing yard 2 days later and asked Lyra about the torn pad treatment she had done for the injured secondary wolf, and Lyra explained it. And Tharv asked 3 more questions with the focused attention of a commander who is evaluating a new asset and finding it sound. and after that there was no more irregular in her register. What there was instead was a habit of sending the pack wolves to the yard directly after injuries without waiting to ask me, on the grounds that the healer was on site, and there was no reason to waste time. Cavis was the one who surprised me. He came to me 3 days after the council session and said, without preamble, "She's a better choice than the Thurwick Alliance." I said, "I know. The Thurwick Alliance would have brought trade agreements. She brings something that doesn't appear in agreements." "What's that?" He considered this. "You were holding your grain tallies upside down for 20 minutes on the first day," he said. "I've been watching you manage this hold for 14 years. You have never in that time read a document upside down." He paused. "Whatever she brings, you've already been better at your work for having her here. This is not how people talk in council, as a rule. Cavis is not a man who deals in the register of what you've already been better for. He is a man of alliances and tallies, and the careful calculation of advantage." He said it anyway, and walked away before I had to respond to it, which was exactly the right thing to do. Lady Unna, who held the healing portfolio, spent an afternoon in the yard with Lyra in the second week. I did not witness this, but Thatch reported that they spoke for 3 hours and that there was a great deal of focused discussion about the hold's medical records, which were apparently not filed in a system Lyra considered optimal. By the end of the afternoon, Lyra had proposed a reorganization of the filing, and Unna had agreed to it, and they had drawn up a preliminary structure on a piece of Healyard paper. Unna told me afterward she doesn't want a title. I know. She specifically said she doesn't want to be designated Luna in any formal documentation relating to the healing work. She said the work should stand on its own record, not her position. That sounds right. Unna looked at me with the expression of a woman who has been managing the hold's welfare for years and has reached a firm conclusion. "She's right," she said, "and you should support it." "I intend to." "Good." She turned to go and paused. "The filing system she's proposed is significantly better than the one we've been using." "I have no doubt." The cedar oil location alone was. "I know," I said, and she smiled the small, private smile of someone who has heard the cedar oil mentioned by 4 different people this week and finds the consistency of it satisfying. Aldrich came to me last, the bond counselor, who had been the one to name what was in the doorway. He found me in the courtyard garden, the private one behind the east wing, where I go when I want to think without being useful to anyone. Bren was with me. The fog was in, the way it is in the late 10th month, soft and low off the river, the stone walls of the courtyard holding the cold. He sat down on the bench opposite mine and was quiet for a moment. "You should know," he said, "what I read in her bond signature, in case you're wondering." "I know what you read. You said the pack's resonance recognized her." "It did, but that's the technical fact." He was quiet again. "What I actually read was longing Calder, a long, sustained longing like something that has been kept at a steady burn for a very long time without fuel. Not grief, not hope exactly, just longing directed at nothing in particular because it had never had a particular place to go." I looked at the fog. "She has been alone for a long time," he said. "Her own bond has been burning without a target for all of it. That's what Bren heard. Not her scent, not the technical resonance. He heard the longing, and he knew where it belonged." I was quiet for a moment. "He's a better man than I am," I said. "He's a better wolf than most," Aldrich agreed. "But he's not the one who stood up in council and said the thing about the cedar oil." I looked at him. "She told Unna," he said without apology. "Unna told Pellin. Pellin told Tharv. Tharv told me." A pause. "You said the specific true thing. That's not nothing. A fated bond is a fact of nature. Saying the specific true thing to a woman who has spent 10 years without anyone saying it, that's the part that was yours." He got up and left me there with the fog and Bren and the garden, and I sat with it for a long time. We did not have a ceremony. Lyra said she didn't want one, and I agreed with her, because ceremony seemed like the wrong register for what had happened between us, which was not a grand formal event but a series of ordinary mornings, and the accumulated weight of time spent in the same place with a person who makes sense to you. What we had instead was a breakfast, 3 weeks after the council session, in the East Wing kitchen. Lyra, me, Pellin, Farwick, who had come up from the lower town for the occasion, Thatch and Bren, who sat under the table and put his head on Lyra's feet, which was the first time he had ever put his head on anyone's feet but mine, and which was not lost on anyone present. Farwick was 81 and had the expression of a man who had arranged, in the most indirect possible way, the outcome he had wanted, and was now enjoying the satisfaction of it without saying anything, which was his precise usual manner, and which I had, by that point, learned to appreciate. "You knew," I said to him at some point during the breakfast, "on the first visit, when you described her, you said she was perceptive." "I said she was quite perceptive," he agreed. "That was a warning. That was a description." Farwick. He smiled the small, settled smile of a very old man who has seen a great many things come right and knows that they don't always, and values it when they do. "She examined your wolf for 30 minutes on the first visit and found nothing wrong," he said. "Anyone who can spend 30 minutes examining a wolf that is performing illness and maintain a professional expression throughout, that's someone worth the trouble of keeping around." Lyra said from across the table without looking up from her breakfast. "I knew by the foreleg. The limp had switched sides." "I know," Farwick said pleasantly. "I saw it too." "Then why did you send for me a second time?" He looked at her over his cup with the tranquil certainty of a man who has been right about things for 8 decades. "Because I thought you should come back," he said. "And I thought you would." She looked at him for a moment, and then looked at me, and the not quite amusement was back in full, the version with weight in it, the version that had been building since the first visit, the version that belonged to something accumulated over time. "You're all terrible," she said. "We are," I agreed. "We're working on it." "Are you?" "No." She laughed the real laugh, the unguarded one, the one that I had stored the memory of from the healing yard and had been glad to hear again every time since. Bren thumped his tail against the floor. Thatch grinned. Pellin refilled the cups. Farwick sat with his hands around his and looked out the kitchen window at the fog coming off the river, the fog that is always there in the late 10th month, soft and low and permanent, and his expression was the expression of an 81-year-old man who has lived long enough to see the complicated things arrive at their simplest form. Bren lived 5 more years after that morning. He was 36 when he died, which is old for a wolf and older than I had known any bonded wolf to reach, and he died as he had lived, on his own terms, without drama, at a time of his own choosing. He had been slowing for 2 years, his big gray body settling into the particular stillness of a wolf who has done what he came to do and is not in a hurry about the rest. He died in the night, his head on Lyra's feet, the way he had slept since the morning of the breakfast. I did not expect that I would bear it as well as I did. I had known it was coming, the way you know all the things that are coming when you have had 36 years to prepare, and I was prepared in the intellectual sense, and none of that preparation accounts for the specific weight of absence, the precise negative space where a warm presence was. What helped, what I had not known I would have, was Lyra, who was there, who did not try to fill the silence with anything because she understood that some silences are not to be filled, and who simply stayed with me in it for as long as it needed to be stayed in. She told me after that Bren had done the same for her in the quiet years before she came to Veldrath Hold, that his longing and hers had been the same longing, running in opposite directions, looking for the place they were supposed to converge. I had not known that a wolf could hold longing for his king that way, could carry the shape of what was missing and look for it in the world with the steady, patient attention of a creature who does not doubt that the thing exists. I know it now. The healing yard has a second healer now, a young man from the northern holds whom Lyra trained herself over the course of 3 winters. She still works in it most mornings. She has never wanted a formal designation, and it does not appear in the hold's official records, which document her as the hold's senior animal healer and clinical coordinator, which is accurate and which suits her. The council refers to her in session as Lyra because she asked them to. The pack's wolves, all of them, know exactly who she is. They have always known. I know too, but it took me longer than it should have, and I owe that to a wolf who was more patient with my cowardice than I deserved, who limped on a healthy leg and coughed with a clear chest and clouded a sharp eye, who stole a single indoor boot from a corridor and delivered it to a council chamber at the precise moment it would do the most good, who lay for 36 years with his head on feet that were not always mine, and knew that this was the right arrangement. I have 3 wolves now, young ones, from the pack's recent litter, and they are none of them Bren. They are their own creatures, as all wolves are, with their own particular ways of making themselves clear. But sometimes, in the early morning before the hold is fully awake, one of them will come and sit beside Lyra in the healing yard while she is working, and lean its full warm weight against her leg, and look up at her with the particular attention of a wolf who knows where it is supposed to be. And she will look down at it and back at me, and the look will have in it all the accumulated weight of what we are to each other, the dry wit and the quiet warmth and the years and the grief and the fog off the river and the cedar oil in the right place on the shelf. And I will understand again what Bren understood first. That the specific true thing is the important thing, that the right person is recognizable, that a wolf who loves you will go to considerable lengths to make sure you don't miss her. I have not missed her. I will not.